Good morning, Miss Hoffman's class. Alrighty, so our lesson today is called Crossing the Appalachian Mountains. Daniel Boone, who we talked about last time. Does anybody remember who Daniel Boone was? He was a wilderness explorer. He was a pioneer. Alrighty. Daniel Boone continued to explore the Appalachian Mountains, always on the lookout for a path that might lead him to the other side. One day, he visited an old friend, John Finley. As the two men talked, Daniel told John of his desire to find a way to cross the mountains. To his surprise, Finley replied, "Why, I know a way. I've crossed the Appalachians myself." He told Daniel that he knew of several big gaps in the mountains. A gap is a space between two things, so a gap would be a space between the mountains. Formed by rushing water years ago, the natural gaps, or passes, through the mountains had been trampled down, first by buffalo and later by Native Americans. One pass was not too far from where Daniel Boone and his family lived. It's in Virginia, and it's called the Cumberland Gap. Finley told him it's an old Native American footpath. You can only walk or ride horses on a footpath. Wagons can't fit on there. Do you know of any footpaths in Colorado? So Boone was delighted. He asked John Finley to show him how to find it. Not long after that, the two men set off with 4 other men on a big adventure to find the Cumberland Gap. They walked and rode on horseback for many miles before reaching the beaten path that led up a steep side of the mountain. They spent long days climbing up, and up. Daniel's skill as a woodsman helped him identify animal tracks and follow the Native American footpath. They were overjoyed to reach the top of the mountain, where they could see a magnificent river stretching out beneath them. Following a narrow footpath, the men finally made it to the other side of the Appalachian Mountains, to the land that is now known as Kentucky. Daniel and his friends were pleased with what they had found on the other side of the mountains. The land was rich and fertile, and there were great herds of buffalo grazing on grasses. For the next 2 years, Daniel Boone stayed in eastern Kentucky, hunting and trapping wild animals. When he finally returned to North Carolina, he was met by other settlers who expressed an interest in leaving their homes in the east and moving westward. These pioneers asked Daniel if he could show them the way across the Appalachian Mountains. "It's not an easy trip," Boone told them. "The forests are dense, and there are many dangers along the trail." But the pioneering spirits of these settlers remained strong. 2 years later, they convinced Daniel that they were serious about making the hard, dangerous trip to the wilderness lands. And so, Daniel led his own family, along with several other families, back through the Cumberland Gap into Kentucky. However, the trip proved them even harder for the families than it had been for the woodsmen. The families were not used to living in the wild outdoors like the woodsmen. Setting up a settlement in Kentucky was more difficult than the pioneers expected, and they were forced to go back home over the Appalachian Mountains. Later, a businessman offered Daniel Boone a job to help widen some Native American trails that crossed the Appalachian Mountains. He wanted Daniel to make the trails wider and clearer marked so that pioneers would not lose their way as they crossed the mountains. Daniel Boone became known as a trailblazer. He helped open up many of the ways we now go today. Daniel Boone gathered together a group of men to help him clear the forest through the wilderness. Together they worked through the rain, snow, and mud. Their axes chopped down trees and bushes to widen the old Native American footpaths so that the pioneers' wagons could fit. Remember that the footpaths were not wide enough for wagons yet, so they had to go through and cut down trees so that they were. They built long bridges across streams Daniel Boone and the men successfully cleared a trail from eastern Virginia through the Cumberland Gap and into Kentucky. The trail was originally Native American footpath called the Great Warrior's Path. Later, it became known as a wilderness road. So why do you think the trail received this name? Pioneers from Virginia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania began to move along the wilderness road in great numbers. By the time that Kentucky was declared a state, less than 20 years after the trail was widened, more than 100,000 people had used the wilderness road. Daniel Boone's hard work was responsible for opening up the area known as the West to pioneers. As more and more settlers streamed into the West, relationships with Native Americans who were already living there became even more strained. The Native Americans and the settlers wanted to live on the same land and sometimes fought about it. Daniel Boone's own family was the first pioneer family to settle in Kentucky. Daniel chose a spot near the Kentucky River to build the fort. It took several years to complete the fort. About as large as a city block, the fort sheltered log cabins and people that lived there. The fort was named Boonesboro after Daniel Boone, the man who built it. Life was difficult for the pioneers in the beginning, but people kept streaming across the mountains. In fact, so many people came that Daniel Boone felt his wilderness was being destroyed. It was no longer a wilderness land. How might the Native Americans who were already living there have felt about the wilderness being destroyed? He never gave up his love for the wilderness and continued to explore lands to the west of Kentucky until his death at the age of 86. Alrighty, everybody, check out the craft while you think about these questions. What do you predict will happen next to Daniel Boone and the explorers and pioneers? How were Daniel Boone and John Finley able to cross the Appalachian Mountains into Kentucky? And what did Daniel Boone and his friends do in Kentucky the first time they went across? Alrighty, everybody, have a great day.